I'm Dr. Lily Krug, though most people just call me Lily these days. After years of saving lives, I now mostly deal with paperwork at a local hospital and occasionally help out new doctors. But today isn't about any of that. Today, I'm getting ready to meet Amy, my son Scott's fiancée. My usual home is under renovation, so I'm staying in this small, simple rental. It's not much, but it's comfortable enough for the time being. To make the meeting special, I decided to bake my famous apple pie. Nothing says, welcome like a homemade pie, right? Just as I was pulling it out of the oven, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer the door. There was Scott, looking as handsome as ever, and beside him stood Amy. She was just as beautiful as Scott had described, with a certain sharpness in her expression that made me take notice. "Mom, this is Amy," Scott said proudly, his voice full of happiness. "Nice to meet you, Lily," Amy said, offering her hand, though it felt a bit stiff when I shook it. "Come in, I hope you're hungry." "The pie just came out of the oven," I said with a smile, stepping aside to let them enter. Amy walked in and immediately started looking around the living room and kitchen. I noticed the little frown on her face as she took in the third-hand furniture, the old kitchen cabinets, and the plain walls that could definitely use a fresh coat of paint. "It's cozy," she said at last, with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Lily, Scott tells me you work at the hospital. What do you do there?" she asked. "Oh, just some administrative work now," I answered, not wanting to boast about my long career. Scott glanced at me in surprise. "Mom, why don't you tell her about," he started, but I quickly cut him off with a wink as I began slicing the pie. "Never mind that. Let's have some pie. You'll love it, Amy. It's my special recipe," I said, steering the conversation away from my job. As we sat down to eat, Amy seemed more focused on asking questions than enjoying the pie. "So, how did you manage to send Scott to private schools? That must have been tough on just a hospital admin salary," she asked, her tone a bit too forward for my liking. The question took me by surprise. It felt a little too personal, and it annoyed me. I kept my voice steady. "Well, I had some help from my parents. They left me a small inheritance," I replied, hoping to keep things polite. I could tell she was judging me, trying to figure out how someone with a simple job could give their son such a fancy upbringing. Her questions felt more like an interrogation, each one coming with a sharpness, even though she tried to hide it under a polite tone. Scott, bless him, didn't seem to notice the tension. "Amy's been great with all the tech support at her job. You should see her in action, Mom," Scott said proudly. "That's impressive," I said, turning to Amy with genuine interest. "Technology really is the future, isn't it?" "It is, and it's so rewarding to be at the cutting edge, being part of something that really makes a difference," Amy replied. There was a mix of pride in her voice, along with something else I couldn't quite figure out. We kept chatting while eating the pie, moving from Scott's job to their wedding plans. I did my best to make Amy feel welcome, despite the awkward start. When it was time for them to leave, Scott hugged me tight, but Amy's goodbye felt cold, her smile practiced, but not reaching her eyes. As I washed the dishes, I made a mental note to stay alert. Scott was my world, and I wasn't going to let anyone mess with his happiness. After that first awkward meeting, I hoped things would get better with Amy, but as the wedding planning moved forward, so did the tension between us. Amy had a way of keeping me out of the planning, using polite but cold responses that made me feel like an outsider in my own son's future. One afternoon, Scott and Amy came over to talk about the wedding. I had made some coffee and put out a few snacks, hoping to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere. "Mom, we were thinking of having the wedding by the lake. What do you think?" Scott asked, spreading out photos of the venue on the coffee table. Before I could answer, Amy quickly added, "Oh, Lily, it's a bit far from the city. I'm not sure if all our guests would like the drive. We're thinking of a downtown spot, right, Brian?" Her tone was casual, but her words cut me off before I could share my opinion. I kept my voice steady. "The lake sounds beautiful, Scott. It would make for some lovely photos, and a little drive wouldn't hurt anyone." Amy laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, but you know how bad traffic can be. We wouldn't want our guests stuck on the road all day." I held back a sharper reply and forced a smile instead. "Well, Downtown is nice too, lots of great places there. Scott glanced between us, sensing the tension, but didn't say anything. He had always hated conflict, especially when it came to the people he cared about. Right, well, Amy's been looking into some great downtown venues, haven't you, babe? He said, giving her a supportive smile. Absolutely, Amy replied, flipping her hair over her shoulder. And Lily, we're also thinking of a modern theme for the wedding. Very sleek, very elegant. I'm guessing you'd prefer something more traditional? Her eyes glanced at my old coffee mugs and worn tablecloth, her words dripping with subtle judgment. I clenched my jaw, feeling the sting. I like modern just fine, I said, keeping my tone steady. The most important thing is that you two are happy. That's sweet of you, Amy said, her smile tight. We're just aiming for something more current. It's all about the image, after all. As they continued discussing wedding details, I nodded along, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Every word Amy said seemed to be pushing me further out, making it clear how little she valued my input or presence. After they left, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. I was used to being alone, but this felt different. It was the feeling of being shut out of my own family. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. My heart was heavy with worry. I had always been the one Scott turned to for help, the one guiding him through life's challenges. Now, it felt like Amy was in control, steering him in a direction where I wasn't welcome. Just have to watch and wait, I muttered to myself, taking a sip. But I'm not giving up, not yet. It was Scott's birthday, and even though things had been tense between us, I wasn't going to miss my only son's celebration. Amy had taken over planning everything, and somehow, my invitation had gotten lost in the shuffle. But a mother's place is by her son's side, especially on his birthday. So I decided to go anyway. I arrived at Scott's house with a small, carefully wrapped gift in my hands. The house was full of life, with laughter and music spilling out through the door. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my chest. Crashing a party was one thing, but crashing your own son's party without an invite? That was another level. Amy opened the door, and her smile faded a little when she saw me. Lily, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you. Her words stung, but I held my composure. Wouldn't miss my son's birthday. Where's Scott? He's around somewhere, she said, stepping aside reluctantly. Well, come in, I guess. The house was decorated in shades of blue and gray, a sleek modern style that clearly had Amy's touch. I walked through groups of people, none of whom I knew. They were all Amy's friends, young and trendy, laughing and clinking their glasses together. Finally, I spotted Scott, chatting with some people who looked like his coworkers. Scott, I called, my voice trembling slightly. He turned, and his face lit up when he saw me.
Mom.
You made it. He excused himself and came over, giving me a big hug. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said, handing him the gift. Happy birthday, honey. Thanks, Mom. I'm so glad you're here. He looked genuinely happy, but there was a bit of confusion in his eyes, like he was wondering why I'd say that. Just then, Amy appeared beside us, her smile tight. Scott, your friends were asking about you, she said, then turned to me. Can I get you a drink, Lily? No thanks, I'm fine, I replied, feeling out of place as she maintained her polite but distant attitude. As the evening went on, I tried to mingle, but Amy's friends were a close-knit group. Every conversation felt strained, and Amy often stepped in to either pull Scott away or take over the conversation with stories of her job and their future plans. At one point, I overheard Amy talking to a friend. Her voice was just loud enough for me to catch. Yeah, it's a bit awkward that she showed up. I didn't think she'd come, considering the vibe. Her words felt like a slap. I wasn't just uninvited, I was unwanted. My presence was making her uncomfortable, maybe even embarrassing her in front of her friends. The realization hit hard, and I found myself retreating to a quiet corner, holding a drink I didn't even remember accepting. A little while later, Scott found me alone, his brow furrowed. Mom, are you okay? You seem a bit off. I forced a smile, not wanting to spoil his day with my feelings. Just a bit tired, that's all. It's been a long day. Do you want to stay longer, or would you like me to drive you home? His concern was real, but the last thing I wanted was to pull him away from his friends. No, you stay. Enjoy your party. I'll catch a cab, I said, standing up. I just wanted to see you and wish you a happy birthday in person. He hugged me again, looking a little worried. Thanks for coming, Mom. I love you. I love you too, honey, I said, holding back the sadness as I left the party. I love you too, baby. Always. With that, I slipped out the door, the sound of laughter echoing behind me as it closed. The night air was cold, but it was a relief compared to the warmth of a party where I felt like an outsider. The next morning, just one day before Scott's wedding, I was in my kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only noise in the quiet room. Then, I heard a knock at the door. Expecting it to be a delivery, I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer it. To my surprise, it was Amy, standing there alone, her face serious, which didn't seem like a good sign. Amy, what brings you here this early? I asked, keeping my voice polite. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, her eyes quickly scanning my modest rented apartment, her disapproval barely hidden. Lily, I'll get straight to the point. I'm here to make things easier for everyone. I have a proposal for you, she said. Oh, I replied, my curiosity piqued, though I could feel a chill running through me. She pulled an envelope from her sleek, oversized purse and held it out to me. I'm offering you $3,000 to not come to the wedding tomorrow. We think it's for the best. I stared at her, not because I was shocked by the offer, but because she actually thought this was acceptable. And why would you think I'd agree to that? I asked. Her lips tightened into a frown. Let's be real, Lily. Your presence doesn't really fit with the kind of event we're planning. You know, with all the important guests we're expecting. My hands clenched at my sides, but I knew I had to play this smart. I'm sorry, I think I didn't hear you correctly, I said, tapping my ear, pretending like I hadn't understood. You want to pay me not to attend my own son's wedding? Why? Amy sighed, clearly annoyed. Because, Lily, you don't exactly fit the scene. The way you dress, well, everything about you, it's just not up to the standard we're setting. We have very influential people coming, and we can't have you there looking like that. She paused, waiting for me to show some kind of hurt or give in. But I didn't. I stood tall, my resolve growing stronger. Go on, Amy. I'm listening, I said. With this money, she continued, waving the envelope in front of me, you could maybe fix up this place, or buy something nice for yourself later. You should be grateful I'm offering this. I almost laughed at her nerve. She thought this place was mine, and that I needed her charity to improve it. But I kept my face neutral, nodded, and took the envelope from her. All right, Amy, if that's what you really want, I said calmly. Her relief was obvious as she gave me a tight smile. Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. After she left, I stood there, still holding the envelope, my thoughts racing. I gently closed the door behind her, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. Amy's cruel words were all there, clear and undeniable. I didn't waste any time and dialed Scott, my voice steady but urgent. Scott, can you come over right now? It's important. We need to talk about something serious. Sure, Mom, I'll be there as soon as I can. Is everything okay? His voice was filled with concern, sensing that something was wrong. Just come. We'll talk when you get here. When Scott arrived, he looked worried. He barely sat down before I said, listen to this, and played the recording of Amy's proposition. As he listened, the color drained from his face, and his expression turned to shock and hurt. Mom, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I can't believe she'd say those things, he stammered after the recording ended. The wedding is tomorrow, Scott. What do you want to do? I asked, my voice calm but firm, letting him know the decision was his to make. He ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated and confused. I want to confront her, tell her it's over, and cancel the wedding. I can't marry someone who would do this. I held up my hand to stop him. If you do that now, everyone will see you as the bad guy, and she'll play the victim. We can't let her control the story. Scott paused, thinking over what I said. So, what do? We need to let everyone see her true colors. Let them hear the Amy I heard on this recording, I said, my voice calm but full of determination. He nodded slowly, understanding.
Okay, Mom.
I won't say anything to her yet. After Scott left, I made several phone calls to old friends and former patients, people who knew me well and had been part of my life because of the surgeries I had performed over the years. We talked about old times, and though I didn't give too many details, I hinted that I might need their support soon. Sitting back on the couch, I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. Tomorrow would be a big day, one way or another. I was ready to stand up for my family and show everyone who Amy really was. This wasn't just about stopping a wedding. It was about protecting my son from a life of manipulation and lies. The wedding day arrived, and with it came a swirl of nerves and a sense of duty. Today would change everything, no matter what happened. As the guests began to settle into the beautifully decorated hall, whispering excitedly about the upcoming ceremony, I knew the truth would soon come to light. I braced myself for what was about to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. The plan was simple but powerful. Just before Amy and her father were supposed to make their grand entrance, a video about Amy and Scott's relationship was set to play. Instead, I had arranged with the AV technician to play the audio recording of Amy's cruel offer. My heart raced as the moment got closer, knowing how much impact it would have. As the guests chatted, waiting for the ceremony to begin, I gave a signal to the technician. The lights dimmed, and instead of the soft music of the couple's video, Amy's voice filled the room, loud and clear. I'm offering you $3,000 to not attend the wedding tomorrow. We think it's for the best. There was an instant reaction, a gasp from the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion and shock. People looked around, trying to understand what they had just heard. Then, the doors opened for Amy's entrance with her father, the timing perfect. The room went silent as they walked in. Her father smiled and waved, unaware of what had just happened. But Amy's smile faded as she realized that all eyes were now on her, filled with judgment and suspicion. As they reached the front, I moved to the second part of the plan. The screen switched to a video montage of testimonials from respected city figures, colleagues, and patients. They spoke about my years as a skilled surgeon, the lives I had saved, and the positive impact I had made in the community. The contrast was striking proof of my life of service and respect, directly challenging Amy's earlier words about my character. Amy stood frozen, her face pale, as the video continued. The guests, now clearly against her, whispered among themselves, their looks ranging from pity to disdain. Amy's mother, sitting in the front row, had tears running down her face, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Amy's composure crumbled, her earlier confidence shattered. She had been exposed in front of the very people she had wanted to impress. As the video ended, the room fell into a heavy silence. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air, thick with broken expectations and hard truths. My son Scott took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, his face serious. Every eye in the room was on him, filled with curiosity and concern, waiting for what he would say next. I'm very sorry, Scott began, his voice echoing through the silent hall. But I didn't see the selfishness and arrogance of my bride sooner. He paused, looking out at the crowd with regret. I'm canceling the wedding, and I apologize to all of you for the inconvenience. Then he turned to me, his expression softening. Mom, I'm sorry. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Without you, I might have made the biggest mistake of my life. His voice cracked a little, and my heart filled with both pride and sadness for what he was going through. A soft murmur of support rose from the crowd, and some guests stood up, applauding his courage. A tear slipped down my cheek as I watched my son, standing strong and showing the values I had always hoped to instill in him: integrity and strength. At that moment, Amy, who had been standing off to the side, broke down in tears. I didn't know about your mother's background, she sobbed, her voice desperate. This changes everything. Please, Scott, can we just talk about this? But Scott shook his head, his decision firm. There's nothing left to talk about, Amy. It's over. Even her parents looked at her with shock and disappointment, clearly stunned by her actions. They, too, seemed caught in the uncomfortable position of seeing their daughter's mistakes laid bare in front of everyone. Frustrated and embarrassed, Amy's emotions boiled over. "This is all your fault," she yelled at me, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. Her voice was raw with anger. "You've ruined everything." With those final words, she ran out of the hall, her sobs echoing behind her as the door slammed shut. The room was left in silence, everyone processing the unexpected drama. I moved to Scott's side, putting my arm around him. "You did the right thing," I whispered, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on both of us. He nodded, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." As the guests slowly began to leave, many offered quiet words of support or simply gave us a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. I felt a mix of relief and deep sadness. The day didn't go how any of us expected, but truth and honesty won in the end. Scott was hurt, but he was free from a future that could have been much worse. After everything settled down, I finished the renovation of my house. It's beautiful now, a place full of peace and light, just like this new chapter of my life. 3 years have passed since that day. Amy, Scott's ex-fiancée, tried reaching out to me a few times, asking for forgiveness, but after everything, I just couldn't. I told her no each time. The last I heard, she lost her job. Her boss had been at the wedding and saw it all. She moved out of the city, and I don't know where she is now. In the meantime, life moved on in the best way possible. I retired from my hospital job, finally giving myself the break I deserved after so many years of work. Not long after, Scott met Janet. She's a wonderful person, kind and beautiful inside and out. They got married last spring, and it was the kind of wedding we had always dreamed of, full of love, laughter, and real happiness. Janet respects me deeply, and we've built a strong bond. It's such a joy to see Scott happy and in a relationship where they truly complement each other. Just the other day, during a quiet dinner at my house, Janet told me how much she appreciates our relationship. "Lily, I really admire how gracefully you've handled everything. I'm so grateful for how welcoming you've been," she said, her sincerity touching my heart. "I'm just thrilled to have you in the family, dear. You make my son happy, and that's all I could ever ask for." I replied, my voice thick with emotion. The kindness and love that now filled my home were a far cry from the silence it once held. It had truly become a home, ready for future gatherings and family celebrations. Feeling lighter and more adventurous than I had in years, I made a decision that even surprised me. I booked a trip around the world. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but kept putting off. Now, with everything falling into place, it seemed like the perfect time. When I told Scott and Janet, they were thrilled. "Mom, that's amazing. You've always talked about seeing the world," Scott said, his eyes lighting up. "And you've more than earned it," Janet added, giving me a hug. "We'll manage just fine here. Go make some amazing memories." So here I am, finalizing itineraries and packing my bags, ready to explore the places I've only read about or seen in pictures. It feels like I'm not just traveling to new countries, but also stepping into a new phase of life, one where I can simply enjoy and embrace the beauty of the world.